It is always a great day for the Igor Nation when we talk about the trickiest chess opening ever, the Rousseau Gambit. I've recorded 3 videos about it, which collectively got over 2 million views, and I can see that from that onwards, the opening became a lot more popular, and of course I love seeing you guys are crushing it with this opening, but you also sent me a bunch of questions and I wanted to answer them today. Also want to show you how to refute the refutation in a really spectacular way. But let's start from the very beginning. How do you get to the Rousseau Gambit? Well, after most common opening moves, knight f3, knight c6, and white goes for bishop c4, black usually goes for either the Italian game with bishop to c5 or the two knights game with knight to f6, but instead of all that, you shock your opponent by playing our bad boy, the Rousseau Gambit, pawn to f5, which is in fact a reversed version of the Vienna game, but you play it not with the white pieces, but with the black pieces. Now, initially, pawn to f5 looks like a suicidal move. You give up a pawn, you weaken this diagonal, looks like you're doing it all wrong, but the opening is so tricky that lots of natural moves of white lead them to a disaster. Now, in most of the cases, your opponent will see that you're attacking his pawn on e4, and at the very same time, you're dropping your own pawn on f5, so they'll just go ahead and take it. Now, after that, you push your own pawn to e4, and now your opponent starts realizing that something is going wrong. Now, this knight's being attacked, and what can he do? Your queen takes away these two squares for his knight, so he can't go there. And your knight from c6 controls these two central squares, and therefore it looks like white's knight can't go there either. In reality, this move knight to d4 is still possible, and it's very tricky. You gotta know how to handle that. I'll talk about that in a minute. But most of your opponents will not figure out that this move is possible. So they'll think, okay, what do I do with this knight, with this threat? Going back to g1 certainly looks very passive, it's just undeveloped knight. After that, you can follow up with d5, gaining one more tempo for your development. Then you're gonna develop your bishop and get back your pawn on f5, and you completely dominate, and it's clear by now that you fooled your opponent. He has to waste a lot of time moving his pieces back from where they were developed, while you controlled the center and dominated the game. Some of your opponents will decide to be smart and instead will play queen to e2. Let's not forget that your opponent still thinks that you play dubious moves and he feels like he needs to punish you for that. So he thinks that queen e2 pins this pawn and possibly maybe white will even win it. He's still up a pawn, so he still thinks that life's good. But you counter that with the same move queen to e7, which unpins this pawn and renews the very same threat, pawn takes f3. So it turns out that queen e2 was actually a useless move for white, and he has to move the knight back anyway. In fact, queen e2 was the wrong move, because in many variations it gives you an additional option of jumping with your knight to d4 with a tempo, hitting the queen, hitting this pawn on c2. Therefore, again, queen e2 was actually wrong, but it just goes to show you how tricky the Rousseau Gambit is. A lot of the moves that are seemingly good for white lead them to disaster. Now, in this position, I recommend that you go knight f6, which is a multi-purpose move. First off, you take away the square h5 so that he can never go there and check your king. It's one of the kind of little bit issues with the Rousseau Gambit. Since you moved your f pawn away, you got to be careful with this check. But it's really simple to stop it. Just go knight f6, the move that you will go into play anyway, just to develop. But it also takes away the square h5 so that white's queen can no longer go there. Now, the other idea behind the move knight f6 is that you prepare this move pawn to d5, which will occupy the center, as well as attack the knight, the bishop. So, pretty cool. Now, what can white do here? They realize that they cannot develop this knight because of your annoying pawn on e4. And therefore, your opponents will usually choose one of the two moves. They'll either develop the other knight, just aiming to develop, or they'll play pawn to d3, trying to eliminate this annoying pawn, which takes away the square from this knight. So either d3 or knight to c3. They both fail quite badly in a spectacular fashion. Now, let's start off with the move d3, the move that, if you're a part of the Igor Nation, you're probably aware of, but anyway, it's always useful to see this combo. You follow up with knight to d4, another unpleasant surprise for white. You're not going to just trade off material, you're going to attack. Knight to d4 attacks this queen, plus you're hitting this pawn on c2. And your opponent cannot allow you to capture it, because from there, it's going to check the king, it's going to fork the rook, so white definitely needs to keep guarding this pawn. And if the queen goes either to d1 or to d2, it doesn't really matter, because you actually sack your knight there anyway. Knight to c2, check to the king and the rook, and as the knight is captured, pawn to d3 delivers this really beautiful discovered attack of the queen, therefore winning the queen on the next move, and that's how you completely destroy and fool your opponent. Some of your opponents will be lucky enough to avoid this line, and instead of going d3, they'll play knight to c3. After that, it's harder for black to develop their attack, but there's still the way that you must know. It still starts with the move knight to d4, a kind of similar idea. We attack the queen as well as this pawn on c2, which forces white to go queen to d1. And now, the move that actually allows you to attack at the quickest way possible is to play pawn to d5 and to sacrifice this pawn for the sake of your quick development. Now, this is a pawn sacrifice because white is attacking this square twice, therefore they'll usually take it, and after this exchange, they kind of won a pawn. But the upside for you is that you continue your development rapidly, and here, you being a generous person, give white a wide range of options of exactly how they want to be destroyed. And, like, really, what can they do? Like, if they try to develop this way, knight e2, just trying to castle, you play bishop g4, and all of a sudden it turns out that white fails badly. The knight is pinned, and as you capture it, you'll also capture that queen on d1, and white is defenseless. White's going to lose here. So knight e2 fails. What else can white try? Many of your opponents will realize that this knight on d4 is really annoying, and they'd wish to go pawn to c3, hoping for your knight to go back to c6. But instead, we know that the Rousseau Gambit is full of surprises, and therefore we surprise your opponent with knight to f3 check. After this trade, we still make use of this discovered check to his king. And now if the king moves, bishop d3 is very neat and accurate, nearly checkmate, but it will become a checkmate within a couple moves. So the king is attacked, this pawn is taking away this square, our queen is taking away this line. Really cool. Now let's take it back. What if your opponent managed to calculate this line and decided, okay, I'm going to cover with a knight because I'm a piece up, so let's just trade off everything on e2 and I'm still good in an endgame. You say, no dude, because of bishop to c2. It's a really beautiful deflection. You deflect the queen, and as it moves away, queen takes e2 is yet another checkmate. Finally, what if your opponent decides to go all out and try taking as much as he can with bishop to b7? There are different ways for you to go about this. The easiest is just to move the rook away, attacking this bishop. Notice that your knight controls this square, therefore the bishop cannot go there and check your king because it will be captured. Therefore, the bishop has to go elsewhere, and then you break open with the move pawn to e3, and you still get to this weakness on c2, which is attacked by your bishop and knight. Plus, with the move pawn to e3, you also start creating various checkmating threats to his king. Plus, in many of these variations, there is a move queen to c5, which puts pressure to this bishop as well as to the pawn on c2, and all in all, white's position falls apart. In most cases, your opponents will simply take on e3 somehow, but after knight to c2, you're forking his king and rook, therefore winning the rook on the next game and getting a winning material advantage. Some people believe that the Rousseau Gambit can be refuted by the knight sack knight to d4. White's idea here is that they want to open up this diagonal and seduce you to capture the knight. Knight takes d4 is indeed wrong for black, would allow white to play queen h5 and then deliver some sort of scholar's checkmate, nearly. Therefore, indeed, this line is bad for black, but the solution is really simple, you just don't go for it. Therefore, let's take it back. After white played knight to d4, offering this knight sacrifice, we already know that we gotta be careful, you gotta watch over this queen h5 check. And the way to stop it is standard. You just develop your knight to f6, which is a nice move, development move, and you also take away this square. After that, life's good. This knight currently is hanging, right? Therefore, they got a trade. After that, you recapture, and white achieved nothing. If they castle or whatever, you play d5, gain a tempo, attacking this bishop on the next move. You take back this pawn on f5. You dominate in the center. You have better development, more space, and overall, on these lines, we're going to play bishop d6, castle kingside, and you have great chances to attack on the kingside in the middle of the game. So clearly, this cannot be called a refutation. You actually have a much better game here. So what is the most challenging move that you're going to face when you try out the Rousseau Gambit? Well, it is the move pawn to d4. But first of all, you are unlikely to see this move unless you're facing players who are rated 2000 or even beyond that, because it's certainly not an intuitive move to play. Now, by playing pawn to f5, you attack this pawn on e4, and your opponents, most of them, will usually try to think about this pawn, and they'll either take here, or will try to defend this pawn by playing maybe d3, or maybe knight to c3. They'll choose one of those moves. So d4 is a counterintuitive white counter strikes, which is a more advanced thing, so again, you're going to face it only when you deal with more advanced level players. By the way, knight c3 fails nicely because after this trade on e4, and this d5 fork actually wins one of white's minor pieces. That's just another little trick of the Rousseau Gambit. Nevertheless, let's come back and let's talk about the most challenging move, pawn to d4. Let's say you're facing a really advanced opponent, he's trying to play this move. Now, I've recorded in one of my previous videos that the move which works the best for black statistically is taking this pawn on d4. Because after that, again, it's very counterintuitive for white how to continue properly after that, and only those of your opponents who analyze this position in advance with stockfish will know how to deal with it, but most of your opponents are certainly not that advanced in analyzing rare opening lines. So e takes d4, objectively speaking, is a better option for black. But the move pawn takes e4 is, although riskier, actually proves to be much more fun for black. And again, in reality, it's going to bring a lot of nice victories to you. So if you're willing to take a little bit of risk, I'd recommend this move. Now, this attacks the knight, therefore they need to recapture over here. Now they start creating some sort of threats to your f7 square, therefore you play d5 to shut down this bishop and to gain a tempo. And at first, it looks like white can play queen h5 and deliver some sort of scholar's checkmate, in some near future. Lots of your opponents will be tempted to play this move, and it is wrong. It was better for white just to move his bishop away from c4, and in that situation, white would indeed have much better chances, but queen h5 is really tempting. Now, g6, trying to attack this queen, at first may seem like, white's in trouble because you attack the queen and somehow I can draw this arrow and the bishop, but there's a standard tactics, knight takes g6. And white's point is that they either, break through to your king along this diagonal, or if you take, they might even wish to grab your rook in the corner. Looks like you're nearly destroyed. But the move that turns the table around is knight to f6, a really nice counter strike, which attacks the queen. So white has to do something about that. The queen has basically only one square to go because it has to maintain this pin. If it moves just away somewhere, you simply pick up this knight on g6. That's it. Therefore, the only square available for the queen along the h-file is the square h4. I mean, the h3 square is controlled by our bishop, right? So h4 is the only one. h6 is controlled by this one. So queen h4 is the only move. And in the previous video that I recorded about that, I recommended the move knight takes d4, which objectively speaking is the best move. But I understand that some of you guys said that the following lines are really complicated, and I agree, they are indeed fairly complex. So I've realized that there is another way for black, which is much better, and it works like crazy. Almost in 100% of the games, you win games easily. And that is a move simply pawn takes g6. So initially you pretend like you couldn't find the way out and you just decided to sack material. White is happily grabbing this rook on the h8. He's also potentially pinning the bishop, is ready to create some threats. So you go king to f7, pretending like you're trying to defend somehow. Now your opponent realizes that this bishop is hanging and he needs to do something about that. If he doesn't, you simply take this bishop on the next move, which will give you two minor pieces for the rook and material advantage, which is good for black. So objectively, that would be winning for black. But lots of your opponents will just move this bishop away, which strangely enough loses in one move thanks to bishop to b4, this really beautiful discovered check, and on the next move you pick up white's queen. Again, the statistics is crazy. The overwhelming majority of white players blunder the queen that way, and so you win games really easily. If you're not a part of the Igor Nation, then why not to join? Don't want to sound like bragging, but a lot of those who subscribe to the channel report improvement of their results, so why not to give it a try? I'll be happy to do my best to help you. Also, in case you haven't watched the previous 3 videos that I recorded about the Rousseau Gambit, I'll drop links below in the description so that you can watch them, and you'll be ahead of 99.9% of your opponents, which will maximize your chances of winning. Keep crushing it, and I'll talk to you soon.